What I want to do is instill in every child I can my love and enthusiasm for stories and books. I wouldn't be sitting here now as Children's Laureate if it hadn't been for my local library when I was growing up, because my dad had a very strange idea about fiction. He thought it was a complete and utter waste of time, and I'd never learn anything from it. So we had lots of non-fiction books, but no fiction books. But he was so wrong, because I think reading for me opened so many doors and taught me to aspire, and taught me that I could do anything. The only limits on my life were the limits I set for myself. So I think what I want to do in this post is just show that reading is a springboard for so many other, can be a springboard for so many other creative activities. And in fact, I was reading a study that said that children who read for enjoyment actually do better educationally. It's more important educationally than their family background, their family socioeconomic status. So as I said, I wouldn't be here now if it hadn't been for my local library and instilling that love of books and reading into me. And that's what I want to kind of pass on to other children.
So who got you into fiction? Who took you to the library?
It was my mum, actually, because she loved fairy stories and myths and legends, and so we used to discuss all those. And I'd get books from the library, and then she'd read them after me, and so on. So, but you know, as far as I was concerned, it was kind of from the time I was 7 odd. I'd make myself a packed lunch and head down to the local library, and I did that from the time I was 7 till about 14, when I had my first Saturday job and could start buying books for myself. Because I didn't actually go into a bookshop until I was 13 or 14, but I was always in my local library. So I think that's why I am so passionate about our public library service, because, as I said, I wouldn't be an author, and I certainly wouldn't be sitting here now as the 8th Children's Laureate if it hadn't been for my local public library. So my thing is about getting books into the hands of children and, as I said, instilling in them my absolute love of stories and reading.
I mean, most children like stories, yes, at a young age, and they like books when they're first introduced to them. But what do you think happens? I mean, why do children leave books?
I think it's a number of things, especially in secondary school. They've got the pressures of exams and set books, etc., and they have other things that are competing for their time. So what I like to do is say, but reading is so fundamental, and you can use it for as a springboard for other things. So if you're into music or if you're into art or whatever, then use it. What I want to do is set up a project where we have short stories online, and use them to inspire children to come up with their own artwork, their own music. They can rap or whatever, but all inspired from these stories. So that's a project I'd dearly love to get off the ground in my 2 years.
I suspect a lot of parents are quite tempted to put video games and television and computers up against books and say, no, stop doing that, you've got to read a book.
I think it's about a balance. There's no reason why they can't be doing the other things. I love my computer games, so I'm not going to say, no, you shouldn't be playing computer games, but I think it's about showing children that, especially children who don't like reading, that there are books out there for them. Maybe they haven't come across them yet, but it's about showing them that if they're interested in this subject or that subject, the books are there. And we're so lucky in this country. We've got so many fabulous writers. So I want to bang the drum for the wonderful writing we have in this country and try and get the books into the hands of children who are reluctant readers.
One of the reasons, I was on the judging panel, one of the reasons that you were chosen this year was because of the subject matter that you tackle. You take difficult subjects for children, yes, and confront things like racism. Have you had to do that did you do that very consciously?
Well, I've written 60 books, and so only a few of them tackle racism, for example. But yes, it was a conscious decision, because I was ready to tackle certain subjects, and I wrote a book called Noughts and Crosses, which deals with that. But it was my 50th book, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't labelled as the issues writer or whatever. So I had a number of books that were just adventure stories and mysteries and thrillers, etc., that featured black characters but weren't anything overtly to do with race. But I do feel it's a subject that needs to be brought into the open. It's like another one of my books, Boys Don't Cry, deals with teenage parenthood, but from the dad's point of view. So there's certain subjects that I'm passionate about that I want to kind of raise a discussion about. I don't pretend to have any answers. I don't have any answers. But what I want to do is ask those questions. And what I want to do is raise a debate about particular topics. And so that's what I try and do with my teenage books.
I mean, do you think there's a tendency to play safe in terms of the books young teenagers are given? I mean, the themes are often the same, aren't they? And
Well, I don't know. I don't think that's really true. I mean, obviously, books like paranormal romance, etc., there were an awful lot of those because they were so successful. But that said, we've had dystopian novels that actually tackle some really gritty themes about self-image, about teenage parenthood, about for example, Melvin Burgess has just written a book which is about taking a drug which is going to, is going to kill you in a week's time, but it's about cramming life into that week. So I think teenage books actually do both. They give you escapism and entertainment, but they can also present you with some really challenging themes. And that's the beauty, as I said, of the books we have in this country. We have such fantastic writers tackling a whole range of themes. And so I want to go out there and bang the drum and make sure everybody knows that.
Pitching books at that age group is particularly difficult, isn't it? Because a lot of teenagers will feel that they want to read adult books. They don't want to read children's books. And yet, a lot of adult books might be difficult to access or difficult to understand. Well,
then I think it's about making sure that teenagers know that the things that interest them and the protagonists who are their peers appear in these books. I certainly can relate to that because when I was growing up, there were no books for teenagers. So from the age of like 10, 11, I went straight on to adult books, some of which were highly unsuitable, but there was nothing else. But now I think our teenagers are so well served because they have so many authors, fantastic authors and illustrators kind of writing for them and directing their work at them. So I want to say, if you think that there aren't books out there that are written specifically for you that you're interested in, then come tell me what you're interested in, and I can definitely come up with some books that you'll love.
And we think of you as a slightly older children's writer. I mean, what about young children? Are you going to be working on that as well? And
I will be, but I'm going to be concentrating on upper juniors and teenagers. I think the difference between myself and, say, Julia Donaldson, who was the last Children's Laureate, and Anthony Brown, who was before her, is that they're better known for their younger work, and they've been concentrating on younger children. And so I feel that now it's time the older ones had a look in. And I'm really looking forward to actually going out and talking to teenagers and upper juniors about reading and how to get to them and make sure that they read for pleasure and they enjoy reading.
And in terms of sort of the kinds of stories, if you like, or the media that children are taking stories in. I mean, you've worked in television and novels and different types of writing. I mean, how do you think we, teachers and parents should approach how children should access stories?
I think it's about finding out what children are interested in and directing books to them accordingly. But for example, I used to love comics and my teachers were very sniffy about me reading comics, but the thing is I was reading. So I think it's about using whatever you can as a stepping stone to widen children's reading horizons and not being sniffy about particular books, because if you're, for example, into one thing, then if you're into, say, vampire stories, then I would say, yes, if you love those, then how about reading Dracula? Or how about if you like Gothic novels and horror, why don't you read Frankenstein, which is a fantastic book, and so on. So you can introduce them to classics and modern books, which are about the subjects they enjoy, and then say, well, okay, if you're into this, how about trying a sci-fi story or trying in a different genre? So I very much want to champion the reading of diverse books in diverse genres, diverse writers and illustrators, and as I said, just broadening children's reading horizons.
Is there a sense of desperation right now that these generations coming up may be the last generations who hold books?
I don't think it's a sense of desperation. I think as technology moves on, I think it's inevitable that the desired mechanism, the platform for reading books is going to be electronic. It makes it far easier. I have a kind of iPad in my handbag which has got 300 odd books in it. Now I think that's wonderful, the fact that I have 300 books in my handbag. But I think, and the number of children, there's just been a recent study that said a good proportion of children actually read via electronically, so whether they're reading on their smartphones or their computers or whatever. But I think it's about having a balance, because there's been there's been studies that have shown that actually reading electronically, you may not get the full reading for meaning that you would if you're reading a printed book. So I think it's about having a balance between the two. But the wonderful thing about reading electronically is that you can have value-added reading. So at the end of the book, you could have music, or you could have music on particular pages to emphasize what's going on. You can have author chats. You can speak to the author on a particular day, for example, because it's all electronic. So I think it's actually really exciting. And I think it's about making sure that no child gets left behind in this sort of technological revolution, and making sure that if you don't have access to computers, etc. at home, that children know they have a resource called a library, which is fantastic, so they can go and use that. But it's also about making sure that if you find a printed book daunting as a child, then let's introduce them to books electronically, because a lot of children who might be put off from reading a book will actually tackle it if they can do it electronically. So I think it's about using sort of all the strategies we can to get children reading.